Oh, 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 oh. Blessed is the spot and the house and the place and the city and the heart and the mountain and the refuge and the cave and the valley and the land and the sea and the sea and the island and the island and the meadow. Blessed is the spot and the house and the place and the city and the heart and the mountain and the refuge and the cave and the valley and the land and the sea and the sea and the island and the island and the meadow. Where mention of God hath been made, and his praise glorified, 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 glorified.
Across our doctrinal and political differences, we know that we must change our ways to ensure a quality of life which all can share. We need to provide hope for people of all ages, everywhere, including future generations. To offer hope in the world, we need to have confidence that those in power understand the vital role they have to play at the Glasgow COP26. Our collective energy and prayers will be with those working for a successful outcome.
Because of extreme weather events and climate change, the UN is predicting there will be hundreds of millions of climate migrants and refugees. But the tricky part is we don't know who or when or where. So as a public health person, you have to think, how can we mobilize people to respond both preventively and in the case of a climate emergency?
When I was speaking to the UN Human Rights Council Social Forum on climate change, I talked about the problems of educating communities to accept all the refugees who are coming, because we tend to reject immigrants. And so how do we go from a negative idea of somebody coming in from outside to a more positive approach? And afterwards, the Quaker representative came up to me and said, we need to organize, some kind of interfaith discussions on the theology of the stranger. Because all of our teachings talk about welcoming guests and welcoming strangers. They see this as something positive. And we can use these spiritual teachings to try to change people's thinking. This is a new resource. These are people who can help to pay for our retirement and our old age. These are people who can bring new diversity into the community.
And so it's an idea of approaching these challenges as, although many of them are problematic, there are solutions for all of them. So in searching for solutions, I would ask myself, well, what would be the spiritual principles involved as well as the scientific ones?
On the scientific side, we're clearly over-consuming. We're using much too much of the world's resources, especially in the wealthy countries of the West. And therefore, we need to simplify our lifestyles. And of course, when Baha'u'llah says, take only to your needs, not that which exceedeth them, he's truly telling us that for our own spiritual good, we should become less attached to this constant consumption that we're being bombarded with by the media all the time, getting harmony among all the diverse peoples around us. We need to have much stronger community solidarity. The challenges that are coming from our lack of sustainability are going to be shocks to the system. And if people are united in working together to solve local problems, they'll be able to muddle through the difficulties. If there are divisions in society, the strong grab what they can and the weak are left aside and so on, we will have chaos and anarchy and suffering.
A picture's worth 1,000 words, a model's worth 1,000 pictures. So if you can show a model of where it is working, even on a very small scale, it might be worth moving forward from there.
And of course, all the core activities are learning the tools of building community among diverse kinds of people. They're actually what we need to address the challenges that are coming in the world.
I feel one of the real sort of well-hidden secrets in the Baha'i faith is teaching people consultation in the sense of finding a solution that is agreeable to move forward on the basis of consensus.
You can apply your Baha'i principles creatively to help address the problems of society.
The challenges that face humanity now as a result of our unsustainable practices are manifold. You have rising sea levels, melting ice caps, and it's not only environmental, it's also social. A system which allows the rich to gain in wealth off the backs of the poor is unsustainable just as much as a new coal plant in an already polluted area. And this is why sustainable development as a definition has really grown in terms of its scope. Well, sustainable development has a rather short history. In the lead up to a conference in Stockholm, Sweden in 1972, the developing countries were saying, how can you prevent us from developing as these other nations have by restricting our access to environmental resources or polluting and things of this nature. Whereas the developed countries were doing the opposite. They were saying, you must restrict the resources you're using in the process of your development. And out of this kind of disagreement was born the concept of sustainable development.
At the heart of all the debates at the UN right now, most of the so-called developing countries are asking for the chance to be able to develop themselves, to have a certain lifestyle that they see that others are having. And some of the very difficult questions to answer will be, how can developing countries have the opportunity to do so by putting the climate more at risk? And what will be the responsibility of the developed countries who are responsible for the current situation in the first place? And it's a very, very tense issue because it talks about who's accountable, who's to pay for the future transition, who's going to help the developing countries become so-called developed.
It's a definition that has evolved and become richer over the years. In general, sustainable development is about the relationships that the countries and the peoples of the world have to one another.
It's still a very I versus you, us versus them kind of a discourse. And because of the trying to protect your own turf or your sovereignty, we're not actually trying to move ahead together as one global family. The Baha'i International Community's United Nations Office is an international organization accredited to the UN, and we have consultative status with the Economic and Social Council to provide perspectives and opinions and representing the Baha'i community on various issues. We offer a certain framework for thinking about the advancement of civilization.
The principles of trusteeship, of generosity, of trustworthiness, love, empathy, compassion. These are the principles that we're applying to all the areas of our work here, be it sustainable development, equality of men and women, human rights, in a way that is relevant here at the United Nations.
Those spiritual principles help to focus our attention on those things that are certainly less tangible than the material dimensions, but are so much more fundamental to our lives. The ability to work and to be of service, and all these things that we really struggled to describe, but that we're now finding are actually at the very essence of how we experience life and how we prosper.
The Baha'i international community has been involved with the United Nations since before it was called the United Nations, when it was the League of Nations in Geneva. And naturally that continued through the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. And it expanded in the 90s when there were all kinds of international conferences that dealt with population, advancement of women, sustainable development. One of the really important things that we try to do here is open up space for consultation with anybody involved with the United Nations community.
The UN has a particular way of facilitating and conducting meetings, and we feel that we could try and augment that by offering more consultative spaces where more opinions are being heard, especially from civil society, by convening meetings that to bring different actors together so that perspectives can be exchanged instead of a more formal setting at the UN where there's a tendency to fall back on reading of pre-prepared statements.
At the United Nations, many people are still engaged in particularistic thinking. They think of their certain group, faction, country. We find that that strategy of pushing for one theme or one angle, even if the issue is vital, can sometimes be detrimental to the whole. The concept of consultation, where a group of individuals comes together, they detach themselves from their ideas first, they present their ideas in a humble way, willing to discard them or accept them as necessary, really searching for truth honestly and profoundly, with a diversity of voices from all over the world with tremendous different experiences. That is consultation as Baha'is see it, and that we think will lead to practice or process that will further the cause of human development.
A key part of development and sustainability is seeing what other cultures and what other peoples and what other wisdom in the world exists that can contribute to us behaving in a manner that really does lead to flourishing.
There's a common understanding, or rather misunderstanding, that the UN doesn't really get much done. But it is really the only forum that currently exists that actually brings all the governments together in a common platform to discuss and hopefully build a common understanding of particular issues.
But if this UN process doesn't happen, if the norms are not changed, if world leaders from all over the globe don't come together to demonstrate that this is an important issue, then how is a conversation at the local level or at the national level going to take place? Change happens at the local level, but it's facilitated, it's encouraged by these policies, by these shifts in thinking. But the importance of this particular discourse is that it starts at the global level and it goes to the local level. Why? Because the implications of unsustainable development are global.